Hey everybody, Kris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and I'm standing above the Wheatfield here at Gettysburg on a place called Stony Hill. Most people have driven through this area. The Wheatfield is just to the east of us, and you will probably know the famous 116th Pennsylvania Monument, part of the Irish Brigade. You probably also passed the probably more famous to the 63rd, 69th, 88th New York Monument with the Irish Wolfhound laying at the base of a Celtic cross. You know, you come up into this area, but probably haven't stopped. Most people don't stop up here, but this is a special spot for me on the Gettysburg battlefield, because this is where I have one of the ties to my hometown in Pittsburgh, and one of my favorite regiments, because I have an ancestor inside of this regiment, and that's the 140th Pennsylvania. The 140th Pennsylvania was established during the emergency of 1862, during August and September of 1862. What's that emergency? That's Robert E. Lee marching up from Richmond, starting to threaten the nation's capital at Washington. There's another offensive taking place known as the Heartland Offensive, which will come to ground up in Kentucky. So Abraham Lincoln calls for 300,000 more. If you've ever heard that, we're coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more. And the 140th Pennsylvania, their monument behind me, this is where they come into existence. They were commanded by their colonel, a guy named Richard Roberts. Roberts from Beaver County, Pennsylvania. 3 companies of the 140th come from Beaver County. And Roberts will be in his 40s. He's a widower. He's lost 2 children and his wife. In 1862, she passed away. So all he has is a 10-year-old daughter named Emma. And he writes to her extensively throughout the war. He'll always talk about himself as being her affectionate papa. That's how he'll sign off every one of his letters, and I have some of his letters right here transcribed. He'll also always ask about her health, because he's always worried about her health, what's going on back at home, and tells her to be a good girl and to always learn and listen to her aunts and uncles who she's living with. But Roberts goes around the counties of Beaver and Washington, and he starts to talk to Andrew Curtin, the wartime governor of Pennsylvania, and asks to raise a regiment. Eventually, he becomes the colonel of the 140th Pennsylvania, and 10 companies, more than 1,000 men, go off to Camp Curtin in Harrisburg, not too far from here, and then eventually to the Army of the Potomac, just missing the Battle of Fredericksburg. By the time they get into their first combat, that will be at Chancellorsville, and Colonel Roberts will send home a $50 to his daughter as a memento. He carried it in his pocket at the Battle of Chancellorsville and sent it on to her. They serve in the famed 2nd Corps, 1st Division of the 2nd Corps, in Samuel Kosciuszko's Cook's Brigade, 3rd Brigade, 1st Division, 2nd Corps. And on July 2nd, 1863, they are called into action from the area around the Pennsylvania Monument, about a mile from where we're standing. They cut cross country, and Sam Zook's going to run into a 3rd Corps aide named Henry Tremaine. Tremaine's looking for any help, because the Peach Orchard salient off to my right, Devil's Den, and other parts of the extended 3rd Corps line is starting to fall to James Longstreet's Confederate assault. Zook will march his men right into this area, and on the right flank of his mostly New York brigade will be the 140th Pennsylvania. They'll come up into this area known as the Stony Hill, and they'll face off towards George Rose's more than 200-acre farm, which is just through those trees. Believe me, it's there today. And Roberts will start to engage with Joseph Kershaw's regiments of South Carolinians, the 3rd, the 7th South Carolina, amongst others. Then they will engage with some of Paul Semmes's Georgians, including the 51st Georgia, who's down below us. Roberts, who will be up here and not feeling very well, wrote to his daughter on July 1st, 1863. He said, "I wrote you yesterday, but for fear the rebels got it, I write today. I am well, very well. I received your letter in Washington. I am writing on a stump in the woods. I expect we will soon have a battle. We are going to march in a few minutes." The next day, July 2nd, 1863, was Roberts' last on this earth. He marches out here with the 140th Pennsylvania. He comes up into this area, and his adjutant, William Schallenberg, will write to his 10-year-old daughter, to Robert's 10-year-old daughter, Emma, and state that I received your letter written on August 20th, 1863, a short time ago, and hasten to reply. I am rejoiced to know that you do me the credit to think that I will not consider it too much trouble to answer any and all inquiries concerning your dearly loved Pa. I regret very much that I did not have a longer talk with him before you and I left, and I feel that I should censure myself for not having anticipated and gratified a natural desire on your part to talk with me at some length on those subjects so touchingly alluded to in the letter before me. Your Pa joined the regiment, as you are aware, in Camp Frederick, Maryland on Sunday afternoon, June 28, 1863. He said he felt well and was quite cheerful. but I told him he was not fit for duty. I had but little opportunity for conversation with him that evening, and only upon business matters. Monday morning, he took command of the regiment as it was ordered to march at an early hour. The march that day was a hard and extremely fatiguing one. We halted at a place called Uniontown, Maryland, about 10 o'clock at night. Tuesday morning, we fetched tents and remained there all day. I was busy all the while making out reports and muster rolls, and it was the last day of the month, and thus had less opportunity to talk with him as usual. He appeared more lively the day before, although at times I discerned a dreamy absent-mindedness, which was not natural to him. He rode with General Zook nearly all day, and I had very little private conversation with him on Wednesday night at 1:30 o'clock. We threw ourselves on the ground to take a short rest. Then some 9 miles from the battlefield, at 3:30, we were called to arms, and without breakfast, resumed the march. He'll go on to say that your pa threw a blanket on the ground and had some rest, sleeping an hour or so before they entered the battle. He was not very sad on Thursday, July 2nd, 1863. We had some dinner together about noon, which he seemed to enjoy, when we received orders to move to the front at about 5:30. I took my position on the right of the regiment, and I did not speak with him until the line was engaged with the enemy. And that right flank was just over here, facing off roughly towards the peach orchard and somewhat towards George Rose's farm. I went to him and stood to the rear of the center and asked if he had received any orders. The rear of the center would actually be right over in this area because he's a colonel. He should be at the center of his line in the rear monitoring what's happening. I told him that the enemy were trying to flank us on our right and supposed we would have orders to move in that direction. He says, I have not seen General Zook nor any one of his riders. I have no orders. Roberts doesn't know that Zook has been mortally wounded. I have no orders, which were the last words I heard him utter. He then passed through the regiment and walked in the front of the lines towards the right, where he fell. So he walks around the front, and according to one account, Roberts wants to lead a counterattack against the Confederates. He moves around to the front, and that is where he falls, near where Captain David Atchison of Company C, probably the most famous casualty of the 140th Pennsylvania, fell here at Gettysburg. He has a rock inscribed with DA 140th PVI over near the Weikert farm. I am not sure if he had a conversation with Reverend Clark to which you refer. If so, it was at least not in my presence. It was indeed a great loss to you. I cannot wonder that you miss him very much, for I think that no one has ever mourned the loss of a father more kind and affectionate. He spoke to me very often about you, and so tenderly. A few months later, Emma Roberts, who is dubbed the daughter of the regiment after this, will receive a letter. And this will be in 1864, I should say almost 11 months later. And it comes from a man named C. Wilson Witherts, who is the surgeon of the 140th Pennsylvania. He says, Dear Miss Emma, it affords me great satisfaction to be able to inform you that on yesterday I received the sword belt and scabbard which were taken from your father's body upon the field at Gettysburg. The sword was in the hand and I presume was lost, but the belt and the scabbard were taken from the body of a dead rebel volunteer at the fight at the crossroads in the wilderness on May 6, 1864, by Lieutenant Neely of Company I, 149th Pennsylvania Volunteers, residing in Huntington County, Pennsylvania. What happened was many of the wounded are left out here for days, and Roberts is one of the bodies that will be laying out here. He was killed in action. His body is stripped by the Confederates, and amazingly, his scabbard and his sword belt are recovered by a member of the Bucktails, 149th Pennsylvania, at that time in the 5th Corps, in the wilderness, and sent back to Emma. Emma will live a full life, move to Ohio. She'll marry a man who is related to the First Lady of the United States, William McKinley's wife, Ida McKinley, and she'll have three kids. She'll always be known as the daughter of the regiment to the men of the 140th. And we have her letters between the men of the 140th, which are touching, as well as her and her father. And so this is just one tie we have to the battlefield out here. My tie goes from the colonel of this regiment down to a private in Company K, who would have fought roughly in these woods right over here at the center of the line. Colonel Roberts would have been right behind this company, Company K, the color company. And Robert Virtue, who we'll put a picture up on the screen, is a farmer from Cross Creek, Pennsylvania. He joined the Union Army on August 15, 1863, technically September 4th, that's when he's mustered into federal service. But his local preacher and some men came out to the Cross Creek Church, and they start to rally the men for this emergency of 1862, and Robert Virtue is one of them who's going to go off to war. Virtue is a private with the 140th Pennsylvania. We have a picture of him taken in Falmouth, Virginia in 1863, proudly in his uniform, holding his Springfield musket. We know it was taken in 1863 because the 140th swapped out their Lorenz muskets for Springfield muskets around that time. He goes off to Chancellorsville, where he fights around the Chancellorsville Crossroads, comes here to Gettysburg, where he is fighting behind me when he is shot in the chest and mortally wounded. He lays out here for 2 days and is extracted from the field and eventually down to Baltimore, Maryland, where on September 9th of 1863, he dies at University Hospital in Baltimore. His body's taken from there to Cross Creek, Pennsylvania, where it lays in the same churchyard where he joined up with the Union cause. One other tie that my family has here to Gettysburg is, and he's my granduncle, by the way, another tie that my family has here to Gettysburg is Leon Pirmet. He comes here to Gettysburg in 1917, May of 1917. And most of you will say, that's kind of crazy. What's he doing here in 1917? Well, there are two World War I camps established here in Gettysburg. One is very famous, known as Camp Colt, and that's in 1918, commanded by Dwight David Eisenhower. There's another one known as the Camp of the United States Soldiers, and it is laid out right in the fields of Pickett's Charge. And Leo Pirmet, he comes out here. He trains with the Cotton Balers, the 7th United States Infantry. He goes off to France, fights in the Marne Offensive, and is wounded on July 22nd, 1918. He was out here at Gettysburg training for war, not too far from where another one of my family members gave their last full measure of devotion. So there's a lot of ties here to Gettysburg. The 140th has 1,000 stories out here. And the story that I'll leave you with is the fact that after this regiment marches off the field, they carried 515 men into action and they sustained 50% casualties. When the casualty rolls made their way back to Amity, Pennsylvania and Lower Washington County, the entire town closed down. Everyone came out to mourn as one. And when they went out to Cross Creek in September of 1863 to try to refill the ranks, sending recruiting officers from this regiment, they were fired upon from the bushes from folks. They had felt the hard hand of war in Washington County, Pennsylvania, and they did their duty, and they had sent their men to go out, but they would send no more. Gettysburg served as a breaking point for some of these families, and that vacant chair that we know of, that came home to Western Pennsylvania in spades. The most famous story, though, is probably of David Atchison. We'll let Evan Portman of our staff tell you a little bit more about David. But David is Company C's commander. He's a Washington College graduate today, Washington and Jefferson College, and he gives his last full measure devotion not too far from where Richard Roberts fell and my ancestor, Robert Virtue, fell here at Gettysburg.
Welcome everyone to Gettysburg 159. I'm Evan Portman with the American Battlefield Trust, and I want to welcome you to Stony Hill, where we're standing. And in another video for Gettysburg 159, Dr. Carol Reardon talked about some of the fighting and some of the stories in the Wheatfield. She talked about Kershaw's brigade from McLaws's division coming through this area, and she talked a little bit about Caldwell's division from the 2nd Union Corps coming through this division. And the Wheatfield is going to be a seesaw action, very confusing and chaotic. And one of these waves will be from Caldwell's Union Division. And they're going to sweep through the Wheatfield behind me, through these woods. And they're going to reach this outcropping here called Stony Hill. And one of the regiments from Caldwell's division is the 140th Pennsylvania, and they reach this point here on July 2nd, 1863, and they're going to be met by fire from the Confederates on the other side of this little hill. And one of the soldiers from the 140th Pennsylvania has the name of David Atchison, and he's an officer in the regiment. He's from Canonsburg, Pennsylvania in Washington County, just southwest of Pittsburgh, and he is mortally wounded on this hill here on the afternoon of July 2nd. And he's taken back down over the hill where he eventually dies, and he and his friends bury him next to a small boulder just north of one of the Weikert farms here on the battlefield, and they inscribe his initials DA 140 PV on the boulder. And his family comes back from the Pittsburgh area, and they exhume his body and they bury him back in Washington Cemetery in Washington County, PA. but you can still see the inscription, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but might be chiseled later on to make more permanent.
Yes, improved later.
It still says DA 140 PV, and you can still see it to this day. 2 other soldiers from this regiment by the name of Lieutenant James Portman and Lieutenant James Pipes are also engaged in this conflict up here. And as the 140th Pennsylvania and the rest of Caldwell's division and Zook's brigade are withdrawing down back through these woods and back across the Wheatfield, these 2 officers, one officer and one soldier, find themselves in these woods behind me, and they come across a wounded comrade from their regiment, and both of them are going to carry him on their shoulders back to safety, even encountering some Confederates who are shooting at them and everything. But they successfully carry this man back to their line, and they receive the Medal of Honor for their actions on July 2nd that afternoon. So these are the Rose Woods, or some of the woods behind me, and these are the woods that the 140th Pennsylvania and Zook's brigade are going to withdraw through. You can see them here behind me. It would have looked not as grown up as it does right now, but yeah, so this would be where the 140th Pennsylvania withdraws, along with some of the other regiments in their brigade, and the Confederates are going to come up over this knoll, or this Stony Hill, as Kershaw calls it, driving them back across the Wheatfield in one of the Confederate waves in this battle.
First of all, my compliments, Evan, for knowing that Kershaw named the Stony Hill in his official report. Well done. And secondly, any idea or speculation why the woods are thicker now than they were then?
For me, Gary?
Yeah, for you.
Well, I believe there would have been cattle grazing or livestock grazing in this area.
Ding, ding, ding. Evan
All right.
gets another one right. Well done. Anything else to add, sir?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for supporting battlefield preservation and education, and I'll pan through these woods in the footsteps of David Atchison and so many others.